Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we are starting off a brand new book and a little background on this book. And if you can't see it there on your screen, we are starting the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. I believe it came out in 2016. Very popular book. I remember when it first came out, just the title, super catchy, had the F-bomb in it. And I swear, I think this book started a trend of other books that had swear words in the title. I think it started from this book. Maybe it was already happening and I just didn't notice it, but this is the book that, in my mind, kind of launched those very catchy titles. But regardless of the catchy title, it's a pretty good book. Lots of very good tidbits in here on how to go about your life, how to live your life. I read this book years ago, probably closer to when it first came out, and then I was gifted it for my birthday last year. So I thought it would be a cool idea to reread it again with you guys, with the audience, and just kind of go over my thoughts and what Mark talks about in the book. That's kind of the backstory of how I decided to do this. Without further ado, guys, let's just jump right into it. Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And one of the best interviews of Mark Manson was actually on, I think it was Charlemagne the God had interviewed him, I believe, for his podcast. It was for Brilliant Idiots. I don't think it was for The Breakfast Club. And it's a very good interview. I actually listened to that interview before reading the book for the first time, and it was a very good introduction into some of the concepts and the chapters that Mark talks about. And I thought Charlemagne did a very good job with it. Hopefully I do a very good job with this. So let's jump right in. Mark doesn't mince words here. There's no introduction. He just jumps right into chapter 1, which is Don't Try. Don't try. And you'll see that a lot of, I think the things that Mark talks about in this book are similar things that we've talked about in, with Winning in Mind or in The Alchemist or maybe even Influence. A lot of these concepts of, personal development are going to be persistent in many of these books, many of these types of books. So in Don't Try, Mark starts out with a story about this guy, Charles Bukowski, who I'd heard of before, but I don't think I've ever really read any of Charles Bukowski's work. I guess he was an author, he was a poet, and that's, the positives about him. But he also had a ton of, as you can see there, negative things about him as well. He was an alcoholic, he was a womanizer, gambler, just really, Mark doesn't mince words. He just calls him what he is. He's kind of a deadbeat, but he's trying to be a poet. He's trying to be a writer, and he's just not getting anywhere with it. And nobody likes his work. Nobody wants to hire him or publish his material. So he's trying to make ends meet, and he's making any money he can from his job at the post office, where again, he just ends up using the money for booze and other forms of entertainment. And it really seems like he is not really going anywhere in his life. Until one day, he gets his big break and he gets an offer from a small publishing company. The name of the publishing company is not mentioned, but it is mentioned that the editor couldn't offer Bukowski much money or promise of sales, but had a weird affection for the drunk loser, so he decided to take a chance on him. And that chance ends up being Bukowski's huge break. He goes on to write novels, poems. He goes on to becoming actually a huge success. So Mark, and the way that Mark writes in this book is very lots of sarcasm, lots of jokes, lots of swearing, and it's a very entertaining read. But there's also a lot of, like I said, a lot of good concepts in the book, and I think that the entertainment on how Mark writes ends up making the book more captivating. Because you'll laugh at some of the stuff that at how he writes things, and then he will just hit you with the main idea, and I think it makes it that much more powerful because maybe you're not really expecting the message to be powerful, or it's like that contrast from being, oh yeah, this is funny, to, oh wow, this just got real, that sort of feeling, if you guys catch my drift. So Mark is writing here, oh, see, the whole story of Charles's life was being down on his luck, not being able to catch that big break, but he never gave up. He was always writing. He was always writing until one day he got a shot and he made the most of it. However, Charles would disagree with you there. So Mark writes that on Charles's tombstone, he wrote the words, "Don't try." So you're kind of thinking like, oh my gosh, isn't that kind of counterintuitive? Because all his life, Charles was trying. All his life, he was still writing, even while he was doing all those very negative things. And yet he still says, don't try. So Mark this whole chapter is about not trying too hard. I know I have mentioned this concept before in one of the books that we went over. I think it was with Winning in Mind, on this concept of countervailing forces, which I got from a book called Mass Psychology by James Dines, who wrote a financial newsletter on stock picking and investing and what have you. And the law of countervailing forces basically said, the more effort you put towards something, the further away it gets from you. And that's kind of what Mark is talking about in this chapter. The success that Charles had was from him knowing that he was a loser and a deadbeat and just accepting it. And not trying to be something he wasn't. And kind of just leaning into that fact that he was super just confident and super just comfortable with who he was. And this is, I guess, the kind of, what's the word for it? Gosh, what's the word? Because I'm looking at that first sentence there. Self-improvement and success don't run together. Like they're not. I forget the word that I'm trying to look for here, but self-improvement and success don't run together. So they don't come in pairs. Just because you self-improve doesn't mean you're going to have success. They're not mutually inclusive. I guess that's maybe the best way to put it. So the picture perfect life zeroes in on what you lack. So what Mark gets at in this section of the book is that you have all this positivity being beamed out to you, and you have all this positivity that you think, and you try to visualize and think positively on your life. But really, all that positive thinking is just reinforcing the stuff that you don't have. So you wanting the picture perfect life zeroes in on exactly the stuff that you lack. Because if you already had the picture perfect life, you wouldn't have to think about this stuff. It would just be there. You would just have it. You would just know it. So what that does is it highlights your shortcomings and failures. And it almost kind of makes you anxious to know that, hey, I don't have that, but I need to get that. And the positivity is just the business world. The positivity is just the money pushing it. You need to care about all those things you don't have because it is good business, Mark says. It's pushing the narrative and it's pushing the dollars towards that area. So, I live in a shitty house. Like, I really want to live in a nice house. Well, yes. Doesn't that seem like something that real estate agents and the housing market would want? They want dollars going to them. Just intuitively, like that would make sense. So there is a lot of support for you highlighting the shortcomings in your life to get the seemingly better things in your life. But Mark is saying you don't need to do that because everything you have, you already have. He says a quote in the chapter, everywhere you go, there you are. So you affirm you are beautiful. He says in the chapter, you affirm you are beautiful because you already don't think you are. So instead, just do what Charles was doing here and just, yeah, I'm a loser. I know I am. And so what? He's not affirming. He's affirming the stuff that he already knows about him. He's not affirming things, or rather, not that he's affirming stuff. He's just very comfortable with who he is, basically. And I know I said this earlier. I might be just talking in circles at this point here. We'll go to the next slide. But self-improvement and success, they don't have to run together. I'm sure in, some cases when you improve yourself, you're going to have success, but other times it's just not improving yourself, but just being comfortable with, this is what I got. So next he talks about this feedback loop, and this is maybe something I touched on the previous slide, but just the fact that you become anxious about being anxious, and then you realize that you're being anxious, so that makes you more anxious, and then it just feeds into each other. Same thing with angry. You ever get angry at something, and then you get upset that you got angry at it, and then that makes you more upset, and then et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the feedback loop from hell. And there is a way to stop the feedback loop from hell. But the feedback loop from hell all stems from this thing that I think we're all taught from a young age is that, negative feelings are bad. Anger, doubt, anxiety, guilt, these are bad feelings. You shouldn't have these feelings. But again, I think that's because we are just so bombarded with positivity from social media, from news, from the TV, from websites, blogs, podcasts. So when all you see is the positivity, it's easy to have the view that, hey, there's something wrong with me because I'm not feeling that. Instead of just leaning into the stuff that you're feeling currently, even if it is negative, just leaning into it and accepting it and not trying too hard to change things. Again, the whole chapter, don't try. So how do you stop the feedback loop? Well, by not trying, you stop the feedback loop. By not trying to change the fact that you're anxious or angry, the feedback loop ceases to exist. So you get angry, and then you realize you're getting angry, and you say, I'm a little pissed about this, but so what? It'll go away. At some point, I'm going to forget all about this. So whatever. That's how you stop the feedback loop from hell. And that's how you stop those negative feelings from consuming you, is just accepting that they are what they are. It sounds kind of simple. It sounds like kind of like some of the defense mechanisms that we read about in Influence, where it's like, you stop social proof, or you stop scarcity by just, do I really need this product? You just ask yourself that simple question. It sounds very simplistic, but maybe sometimes you need that simplicity. We don't want to overcomplicate it. It just that is what it is. So I know what you're thinking, and this is kind of what I thought too, is okay, if you don't try, how are you going to achieve anything? How are you going to achieve anything? So Mark is telling us to don't try. So what? So I'm just going to sit around all day playing video games and not go to work, not have a job. Well, that's not exactly I think what Mark means. And I had a difficult time with this concept too, because this is exactly what I thought. Well, what are you telling us, just to not do anything? And I don't think Mark is saying that. So he talks about this backwards law. So when you try less, things tend to just fall into place on their own. When you tend to pursue the negative, it generates a positive. And the fact that when you suffer through things, you build courage. And it's not that you're trying to avoid anything negative, because that would be trying, but it's that you just run steam ahead into the negative, because on the other side is the positive. And what don't try means, it doesn't mean don't achieve. I think what don't try means you just don't give, and Mark is going to say this, you don't give a fuck. You don't try to give a damn about everything. But instead, maybe you just give a damn about one thing, and all the rest of your life you give less credence to. And this is something, where have we heard this before? But the one thing, where you focus on one thing in your life that by doing so makes everything else in your life easier. So it's not that you don't care about anything else. I realize maybe I might have said that just a moment ago, but it's not that you don't care about everything in your life. It's that you only care about a certain number of things. You still care about other things in your life, but your main focus is like just a couple things, and you really are prioritizing things. And like Mark says here, if you care about everything, you start to feel like things should be a certain way. You start to try to control everything in your life, when really you just stick to the things that you can control. And then everything else, why worry about? So Mark talks about 3 concepts here. Let me see. Let's see here. So what does not giving a fuck mean? Let's look at 3 subtleties that should help clarify the matter. So the number one subtlety is being comfortable with being different. So like he says here, you have to care about something, right? Got to care about something. But being indifferent means you care way too much. You care way too much. So this is where like, oh, I'm just going to do me. I'm not going to ruffle any feathers. I'm not going to take any chances. I'm just going to do the safe thing. Because again, I just don't care. I just don't care. Well, Mark says that's kind of the wrong mentality to have. Indifference means you care way too much, because the fact that you're not sticking your neck out there means that you care about failing. You don't want to be seen as a failure, so I'm just going to do the safe thing. It's not about being indifferent. It's just caring about the things that are truly worthy to care for. So like it says there, actually, and there, the last bullet point, don't care about the 99%, but care deeply about that 1%. And again, it just reminds me so much of the one thing. Number two subtlety, care about something more than the adversity. Oops, I'm sorry there. If you care about too many things, you probably don't have much going on in your life. Your energy will be pulled to frivolous things. Again, you only have so much energy throughout the day. Why not put that energy towards the things that you truly care about and not towards the things that you can't control? He gives an example in the book of somebody arguing at the cash register that they won't take their coupon. And he's basically saying, well, okay, so they're arguing because they have nothing else in their life to argue for. So they're letting the cashier laying into them because their energy isn't going to be spent, anywhere else. Whereas, I mean, that kind of makes sense. If you had other things going on in your life, if you had, I don't know, some other things that you were working on, maybe you'd look at that situation entirely differently. And if that happened to you, somebody's not taking your coupon, all right, whatever, fuck you. I'm moving on with my life. That's happened to me. I remember I was at the grocery store and I was at the self-checkout. I rang up a pretty decent-sized basket of groceries, and then there was like a malfunction in the computer. And the grocery store clerk told me, I'd have to ring everything up again. And instead of just sitting there and complaining, which I could have done, I just said, all right, fuck you. And then I didn't say that to them, but that's what I was kind of thinking in my mind. And I just went to another register, rerung everything, and just got out of there. It's like, all right, I'm not wasting energy on this. Yeah, I'm pissed off. Don't get me wrong, I'm pissed off. I'm not trying to not be pissed off, but it just is what it is, and you just move on. Move on. Number 3, you are always choosing what you should care about. I remember something my dad always tells me. You always have a choice. You always have a choice. So when you're a kid, Mark talks about how you care way too much as a kid. Which I actually agree. We really do. We care about what everybody else thinks of us. If people are looking at what you do, you care about what you wear at school to make sure that you fit in. You think about what your friends think of you at school. And then as you get older and your identity sort of crystallizes, we realize that a lot of that stuff just didn't matter. And as your identity solidifies, you become to accept yourself, and you start to just care about the things that you can control. And you don't try to change the things that you can't. So again, this was just the first chapter of this book. But Mark ends it with asking this question of, what's the point? What's the point of this book that's with this very interesting title, that's a New York Times bestseller? What's the point of it? Well, the point of it is that things are going to suck sometimes and that it's okay. And it's actually unhealthy to be super positive all the time. And when you have those negative feelings, you just lean into them and you accept them. And when you do that, you accept the negative feelings, the pain and the suffering. You work through them instead of trying to go around them. You learn how to bear it, and on the other side, you end up becoming a happier person. The reward on the other side is peace and happiness, tranquility, success, etc. There's a good book by Ryan Holiday. He writes a lot about Stoicism, and the book was called The Obstacle is the Way. So again, it's this concept of you're not going around the obstacles, you're just going right through them. They go on tour mysterious places, right? And they were happiness is a problem. I'm sure we'll have a lot of other good things, other funny things to say, buddy.